So my name's Mark Perrot. I'm head of what we call a development consulting team at Huron Life Sciences, where I lead a team of folk with a really good deep expertise in benefit risk management and in risk minimization, risk management strategies and so forth. So I'm very grateful to Y Summits for the opportunity to join this little panel discussion today. And we've got a couple of panel members with me now. I'm hoping that at least one more should join this first half, and then I've got hopefully a couple of other colleagues coming into the second half of the discussion as well. And obviously the discussion today is about challenges that have been really brought into sharper focus by the COVID-19 pandemic that we're all going through. I think some of the topics probably were bubbling along there, underneath the surface in many companies, but this sudden requirement to change our working practices, I think, has brought them into sharper relief over the course of the last several weeks. So, got a great panel. Even without our third member, we've got a couple of really good contributors with us today. So I won't take any more of your time in my little introductory piece, but just quickly perhaps ask James and Deepa just to give just a quick introduction to yourselves, your role, and then we'll get into the questions that we've been talking about covering during the course of today's session. So perhaps if I could ask Deepa to start, since you were first on the line, and then we'll move on to James.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So this is Deepa Arora. I'm the founder director of CLINEXEL. CLINEXEL is a pharma company. It's a company based out of Mumbai, India, and we provide clinical research and pharmacovigilance services to pharma companies, both biopharmaceutical and medical device companies. It's nice meeting you all through this panel.
Thanks, Deepa. So James.
James Whitehead. I'm the patient safety medical device lead at AstraZeneca, background in consulting and working in life sciences actually for the last 10 years. My responsibility at the moment, as in the titles, medical devices, but just to push us towards more remote monitoring, supporting patient observations. And equally looking forward to talking through how we can improve that while we're in this pandemic.
Thanks very much indeed, both. I do notice that on the attendees list, we do seem to have Alexandr online, but not currently showing video. So let's make a start, and hopefully he'll be able to open that up and join us fully in a minute. And I think Michelle's also there as well, but I think the focus for Michelle was going to be a little bit later on, but if she wants to join the discussion, Michelle, if you're there, do please feel free to just open up the video and we can all join together. So let's make a start. I mean, essentially, I'm quite sure there's, everybody both in the panel. Here comes Alexandr. So let's just give him a second to open that up, and perhaps we can get a quick introduction from Alexandr as well. Currently not showing the video, although it's a blank screen.
Hello.
Alexandr, welcome to the discussion.
Hi. I'm not sure my video is not switching, but I will try to speak now. So I'm a pharmacovigilance officer, local pharmacovigilance officer located in Switzerland, and providing services to few pharma companies. And looking forward to your presentations.
Thanks, Alexandr, and we're looking forward to your contribution to the discussion as well. So I really appreciate your time. So yeah, let's just to get sort of as a lead into the first discussion point. I mean, clearly I think it's clear from the videos that we're all showing here, none of us are currently in an office, or at least I can't see whether that's an office, Deepa, but certainly I think James and I are both definitely not in offices. And obviously, all the people both on the panel and obviously in the wider audience will have been affected to one extent or another, either personally or in the work life, by the current pandemic. The most obvious impact being that this almost total move to remote working in a very, very short period of time. I mean, within our organisation, it really was a matter of a couple of days from the first inkling that that was likely to be the approach we were going to take to that being, applied across the entire organisation. So there are some very obvious, short-term practical consequences of that. And I think that's really where the first couple of questions would be focused, which is essentially enabling, what lessons have we learned from the course of the last few weeks to, enable a workforce to very rapidly move from an office or a typical working environment to a flexible, and remote working engagements. So we'll start with, let's start with, that initial question around essentially over the course of this last few weeks, what have Deepa and James and Alexandr, what have you found to be the most obvious areas where you've learned some lessons about that kind of initial transition from office-based working to home-based working for that, specifically for the PV environment. So perhaps if we could start with Deepa, and then once you're done, we'll move on to James.
Thank you, James. So, when it comes to remote working, we all know that in Pharmacovigilance, we essentially have a SOP on business continuity plan. And we make it diligently. If we are auditing any other company or a CRO, that is the first thing we audit. That is the SOP that is always, a part of the inspection. So, but this is the real time when we actually tested this in real terms, in terms of business continuity plan. So, what we are putting in that business continuity plan, maybe sometimes we think only from a country perspective. The difference here is globally everybody is getting impacted. So that is a major, I would say, major change from what we normally put that, okay, one country or some people are not able to work. But over the last years, like I have been working in pharmacovigilance for almost 20 years, we have seen a major transition. Like we were working on servers, now there is cloud. So, it's very different kind of BCP that we would have put initially that, okay, if your systems are not working, you can submit on paper. But now it is like with cloud, everything was quickly facilitated. And we have flexible environment in my company, so where people can work from home at times. So we do sometimes that because of urgency also, some urgent requests come. Like now it's 6 p.m. in India. So, and we are doing a lot of work with European and Canadian companies and US companies. So we always have to work in a different time zone. So, so we were working already in a virtual environment that helped. And I think more and more companies should get into that, so that, you can immediately activate the same. And most importantly, the SOPs, they have to be very clear so that, normally you can just go to the next desk and ask, but here that opportunity is little less. So we have that kind of facility also available through different, chat boxes, and we have our own company's chat box where we can ask, and it's more like a kind of virtual team. But still, the more SOPs are clear, it's better it is. And although we think that working from home gives us flexibility to work as per our availability, but under such situations, when there are longer periods of remote working, a discipline is very important. Like, when we have, like right now, we have regular 4 meetings for my team. That's what we organized after this. When we were in office, we were not very diligent about regularly meeting at a particular time because we could huddle together anytime and, talk to each other. But now we are diligently meeting, and it's like mandatory that people should join at least 3 meetings, not 4. So that kind of discipline becomes all the more important when you are not in an office environment, because office environment itself is very stimulating. So these are some of the things which we have to, and maybe moving forward, and the way it looks like Corona is not going to go immediately. So we will be following more and more regularly the working from home practices. So this will give us some kind of, I would say more and more rehearsals doing future work. Something like
Thank you. So, and James, what's been your experience of the transition. Clearly, the already in place cloud-based approach to many of our systems and so forth, and the general desire to enable people to have that flexibility, I think possibly so that people can work outside of office hours whenever the business might need them to do so, has kind of established some of those building blocks. But what are the lessons you've learned over the course of the last couple of weeks about that rapid enablement?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's testing. You can actually access it. The cloud is great, but I think you've suddenly got an influx of everyone having to access via VPN. Has that worked? Has it been stress tested? Were some companies prepared for it? So, data entry stuff, often that's from an actual physical desktop computer. Did we have enough laptops available, and then did they work from someone's home? Within, after 3 days of me working from home, I had an update to my laptop which knocked out my Wi-Fi, and so having to run around. We don't have that equipment to hand, the IT support. So I think one of our key lessons has been you need to practice BCP. You actually need to say, right, you're going to work from home for 2 days. Do you experience any problems? And then the other part to it is, right, you are working from home. What's the impact been on your work style? Is it more chats? Is it scheduled meeting? And we've had to adapt to working with each other, and everyone has different styles. And I think that's been one of personally, my learning is having to work with people that maybe don't like having video calls because they like actually being face to face, and being understanding of that change.
Well, thank you, James. Yeah, I think certainly from my own experience as well. I mean, I've been working from home for about 15 years as a consultant, but suddenly having the entire, and I'd go up to the office every fortnight or 3 weeks or something just to maintain that face-to-face contact. So that's gone. I have to say I'm not missing the 4-hour commute up to the office and several nights away from home. But actually, the fact that the company has now put in place some of these, evening Zoom meetings where everybody gets on the call, even if it's not specifically work-related, but just to kind of catch up. It's actually been quite nice, to be honest, because actually having been a remote worker for such a long time, those sorts of things weren't in place previously, and actually that has really helped to ensure that people get that kind of, maintain that kind of community spirit. And actually for some of the people who've been working remotely for longer periods, actually I think that some of these habits might well stick at least a little bit. Once we move back into more kind of traditional working approaches. And yes, you're absolutely right about some of the technical pieces of this. We have a regular requirement to change our passwords, and certainly in the early days of that system coming into play, it was only really possible to change the password while you were actually physically on the company network and not remote. We've now worked out how to get around that problem, but a simple thing like that can result in almost the entire organisation suddenly being offline, and having to, everyone trying to reach the IT support guys in a crazy rush just to try and enable that continuity. Okay, that's super. Now, clearly, communication. I mean, the other question that we thought we would cover around this one was around, clearly in that compliant environment, requiring a good deal of oversight, often quite significant management by metrics and so forth, and typically quite a strong governance model applying across a PV organisation to ensure that standards are maintained. What have you found that sort of leaders in drug safety organisations have done well, or perhaps could do better, to make sure that the organisation is really sticking to its priorities, sticking to its targets? Have you noted, Deepa, that there's been some sort of specific efforts required to kind of maintain that focus on those critical areas of PV that perhaps might run a risk of slipping?
Yeah. Communication has been the key, and it has been the key always in PV. So we have multiple ways to, because most critical for us is missing the timeline. So we have ways to remind us of the 15-day reports, or what we call it, expedited reports, PSO submissions, RMPs, or following up the effectiveness of risk minimization programs, PER. So what we are doing now is, instead of one alert, we are having multiple ways to make sure that people are following the timelines. Nobody is missing by chance. So we have one in database, plus we have one outside the database also to follow. So this is one, and more of people are told not only to just put the things on email or see that it is there in the. It's better to talk, just pick up your phone and speak if you have any doubts, those kind of things. Fortunately for us, IT systems have been working well, but I agree with James that sometimes that can be very, very big challenge. So fortunately, that has been well, so we didn't find that challenge. So.
Thank you, Deepa. Well, perhaps James, if you could comment on that as well. And actually, Alexandr, I know I didn't actually come to you in that last little round of questions. So perhaps once James has given his thoughts on this topic, we'll come to you as well. So perhaps James first, and then Alexandr have a jump in.
Yes, agree absolutely with Deepa and Mark. And just to summarize it, actually we are just doing business as usual and ensuring business continuity in our environment, well, as an environment virtually probably, but it's still the same. And where I see challenges, there are authorities actually who have to take decisions and adjust their policy, and we have actually to follow their guidelines in this period. So this is what makes the whole business special now in this period. But otherwise, absolutely agree with you all.
So to build off that authority comment, we've seen the FDA, EMA, MHRA all respond well to the COVID-19. They prioritise certain reports, and I know within AstraZeneca, our patient safety leadership have consulted. They've met regularly. And I think that regular, frequent communication with authorities and then the rest of the department has put people's minds at ease. I think that's it's taking it back to its bare bones. Getting a case out, a quality case with quality information. We're all often involved in improvement projects, ways to do things better. But at a time like this, you just need to get them done. So we put certain projects on the back burner. We've prioritized pieces. We've prioritized digital. We've prioritized automation. So that we can start to uplift the capabilities that allow you to work remotely, and then allow our team to work in a manner which doesn't put them under undue stress. Because yes, we could get a case out quicker, but often that means people are working harder, perhaps under more stress, and we need to reduce that. And I think the authorities have done a great job in mitigating that, and saying get in the key information. FDA released quite quick, actually. I think they were one of the quickest for their paper.
All right, thank you, James. And are there any? Obviously, we talked there briefly about the sort of single case handling approaches, which are typically on systems which do enable remote access and so on and so forth. Are there other key aspects of compliance within PV which you think potentially could be affected by this wholesale move to remote working? Are there other areas in which there's perhaps more dependency on office-based type activities, or systems which perhaps are a little bit less flexible, which might cause some risks? Perhaps, Deepa, is there anything in that kind of broader compliance area beyond single case handling that you've noted might be something that people should put particular focus on?
Yes. So, I was mentioning, PSURs, RMPs. So those are the things we are making sure that they are submitted on time, signal detection. what things which we are postponing a little bit include the SOPs which are to be revised. So that is something we are trying to delay that little bit with it's a planned deviation we are taking, but otherwise whatever other activities we are trying to be compliant and following the right. We are not compromising there. I mean, anyways, you have to complete them either now or later, so why to delay that?
Okay, and James, are there any other areas that you've noted that might perhaps require particular focus?
Yeah, off-label use. In particular, we've had to make sure that our signal teams are monitoring off-label use, overdose, anything which is generated perhaps by social media or a president. You have to then monitor what's being said, and that's put stress. We've had to build out new reports for our signal management team, add in additional terms. To do on Deepa's point, you continue the RMP, the PSUR, the signal detection activities, but we've now just got to take it sometimes a more minute focus on what the pandemic brings, which, as I said, off-label use is something that we know is in the news now. It's nice to hear in the news that people are talking about off-label use, benefit risk profile. So that does mean we have to adapt.
Yeah, thanks, James. That's fascinating. Alexandr, is there anything that you've noted as well in that category of beyond the single case handling that might be an area of particular focus that might be perhaps build on the other points?
I think everything is covered so far.
Yeah.
Just if we have to handle this situation as a critical one, as a crisis. So actually, this should be covered already by current procedural documents,
yeah.
And just thinking if it needs more specification to adjust, but don't have answer yet.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
No, not at all. Actually, we were going to go to Q&A at the end, and we perhaps come back to the sort of scheduled questions, but I've noticed in the chat that there's a question that's popped up specifically for you, James. Okay, I don't know if you can see it and you've had a chance to prepare. But yeah, the question was essentially around what collaborations do you see happening among the PV community to perhaps help speed development of various vaccine programs for COVID-19? Are there things that you feel the PV community could particularly be focused on to provide more, context, data, information, insight in that breadth of activity?
Yes, I did. Thanks, Danny. I would really like us to start sharing information a bit quicker. We have PVAs in place by our partners, but if you're collaborating on a vaccine, I would like us to see more information sharing, best practice about monitoring vaccines. We know vaccines are developed over a decade. We're accelerating that. And how we monitor safety. Companies like GSK, Sanofi, AstraZeneca, we shouldn't just be collaborating on the manufacturing aspect, the development side. Let's get the PV teams together and actually talk about how do you monitor your vaccines. We know GSK have got ViiV, they've got their purple cases, so they monitor vaccines in a different way. They've got their own case type. So I would like us to see, maybe a community of practice around vaccines at this time, and then extrapolate that out to my earlier comment around trying to come together to talk about, your drug's being used more often with my drug now because someone mentioned it could be efficacious. So how do we build those reports and then collaborate on the best case, pull data together? Now, to enable that would mean, you'd have to get a shared system perhaps, and that would mean, probably having to put a third party in place that can collect the data. So that's what I'd like to see, or what I think should happen. How to achieve that? I know perhaps Denny's got a solution.
not popped anything up onto the chat as far as I can see. It's nice that you could specifically identify your questioner from the nature of their question. Okay, no, that's great. I mean, essentially, across this whole piece, then it seems as though we've been fortunate that in the course of the last few years, just typical working practices have actually helped prepare for this change quite substantially and for this kind of emergency situation. But with the caveats that perhaps the system could have done with a bit more testing. There's certainly volume issues both in terms of the systems within our organisations, the availability of laptops where perhaps companies are still largely reliant upon desktop. And actually, I do think that there are there were kind of concerns that the just general domestic internet might struggle somewhat in a situation where such a huge proportion of people were suddenly working from home. But certainly to date, that doesn't seem to have materialised as too much of a problem. It's certainly in my experience in the UK. And so perhaps those networks, that infrastructure, at least for typical business usage, given that often I guess it's been built for a certain number of gamers, it perhaps is a little bit more robust than we were concerned about. So I suppose perhaps just perhaps go around the panel just for a last sort of brief sentence or two on what you would see as the really kind of top learning points that you think it would be worth those listening in to our discussion could perhaps take away or consider building into their quality management systems or procedures or whatever to perhaps just improve the situation should this happen again, or there's a second round of lockdown once this one has been raised, and so forth. So perhaps if we could start with Deepa on that question, just really top line stuff. Oh, and you're currently muted.
Yeah, sorry for that. So yeah, I mean, we do prepare for BCP, but we don't prepare for such a long BCP. And we are not expecting, at least in India, we have been in lockdown now for almost 45 days, and where I stay, it seems that lockdown will continue for longer, even if it is not an official lockdown, just for the precautionary purposes. We will probably continue to work in this situation little longer. So what typically in BCP we think of hardcore things and key activities, but for such long time, like we have to think of other part also, like how we look at the holistically for the team development, the soft skills and other trainings. So something like this we need to bring in because so long we cannot just focus on technical parts. Like you were mentioning that you have at least a community, community get together kind of thing. So that becomes very important. How people we have been going into the virtual environment. We have been going to Facebook and LinkedIn, and we never liked that. We always said that okay, it's virtual, but we like face-to-face meetings. So we have to probably get now more used to again love a little bit of that virtual environment rather than focusing. So it's a very testing time. So we have to keep calm. We have to ensure that people take it in their stride, and whenever it happens, this is going to continue for longer before we think of next episode like this. So we still have to work a lot focusing on that.
Thank you. Thanks, Deepa. And so again, James, just top line, top priority items for you, do you think?
Well, I'm biased, but I think AstraZeneca handled it really well, especially our pharmacovigilance department, from our procedure perspective. And one of, I think, the pleasant surprises, but perhaps I shouldn't have been surprised, was the way that our LT managed the communication. We've had a lot of face-to-face virtual meetings like this, and they're frequent. There's small bits of information, 30-minute chats, and that ability to actually connect one-to-one, the softer side. But the personal side has enabled us to work from home because we're missing the coffee corner conversations. I think making time for that, and then taking the pressure off people. It's difficult to work for so long on your own at home, and that was clear. So I think understanding the psychological impact has been something that I think we've done well, and I'd like to see probably a bit more formalised in future. What worked well, make sure we do it again.
Okay, yeah, thanks, James. Alexandr, did you have anything to add, just as a kind of your top line on this general topic of kind of the move to remote working? If there's a couple of top line thoughts about lessons learned.
Sure. This is a new situation we all learned about, and actually for me personally, I see that we can do our business still, but it became almost completely virtual. And we are working without borders. It doesn't matter where we are located geographically. We still can communicate with our colleagues, with partners, with authorities. Our business depends on internet access, actually, but we can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. There is another question that's popped up, but let me I think in terms of my experience of this as well. I mean, we've talked a lot about flexible working, and I think for those that are used to working more flexibly / from home already, this won't be an unfamiliar question, but actually I do think it perhaps can pose some challenges for those with families, where perhaps the whole family is now in the house, and it can create some interesting diversions when you've got commitments to work meetings and so forth, and there are family around. Luckily mine are all big, so I can usually kind of rely on them to keep out of the way, but that's not obviously always the case, and sometimes I think it's important to recognize that people will have to be able to be flexible and be able to adjust their working hours somewhat to meet with those sorts of challenges. And actually, just generally, the working hours thing I think is quite interesting. I mean, in a lot of the talk about lockdown, lifting the lockdown, there's talk about, for those who have to go to offices, having a whole sort of staggered approach to the rush hour, so that the rush hour becomes a rush 4 hours, and people have very different kind of work periods during the course of the day. And I think that applies equally in the home working environment, and the company needs to be able to be flexible and recognise that if people are being asked to be flexible and make themselves available, the company needs to be flexible and recognise people will need downtime as well, perhaps during more traditional working hours, which I think that could be quite an interesting challenge as we move on. We've got a couple of questions that have popped through, so let me just quickly look at those. There's one about, would it be wise to conduct a risk assessment exercise, planning the activities to prioritise during a situation like the pandemic? So, I think from Deepa's feedback earlier about the business continuity planning, and the fact that most people, write a business continuity plan for the idea that maybe their systems or offices are unavailable for a day or two. Clearly, there could well be some value in sort of prioritising the approaches that you're going to use in business continuity against those kind of the different sort of situation that we've now learned we may have to face. So that seems entirely an entirely reasonable approach to me, that people should consider. And we've got another one coming in as well for the chairman, for me. That's very nice, thank you very much, from Israel. Do you see an increase of AE reporting by patients and healthcare for drug use and COVID treatment? We're trying to currently set up a campaign to collect all of these AEs in this in relation to this using a web application. So actually, I'm not directly involved in adverse event case handling, but perhaps I could ask Deepa and James or Alexandr if you've seen particular. Chair, I guess this comes, James, to your comment about collaboration, whether there are sort of specific initiatives relating to collection of adverse events around drugs used specifically against COVID. So I don't know, perhaps Deepa, is this something that you've observed? Certainly seems like a very reasonable question that some action could be taken around.
Actually, most of the COVID treatment is symptomatic. In between, there was a surge in use of hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. Because in India, sometimes you can get these drugs without prescription also. So, otherwise, paracetamol. If you see, the guidelines are very clear on the management of mild, moderate, and severe coronavirus patients. In fact, actually, we are working on a coronavirus trial also. These are pretty. These are the drugs that have been used a lot. So there is per se you may not find such a surge. People know their adverse reactions, and you may not expect too much of a difference than what you see normally. Okay. For example, one of the biggest concerns that was with the use of hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin together was that both of them cause QT prolongation, and which can eventually lead to serious morbidities and mortalities. And this is what was actually seen once they were tried on this. So it's not very much unexpected. And as we know, most of the community, those who are busy managing the patients at this time, they may not be focusing too much on reporting. I'm talking of healthcare professionals. They're under so much of stress that in managing COVID patients, there are limited people available, focusing more on their PPEs, the personal protection equipment. They will not be focusing on reporting any adverse reactions. Maybe once things settle down, it will be a good time to speak to them and check. But that's my experience. People are not very keen to even talk about the trials at this point in time.
Okay. James, perhaps just one quick comment in relation to this, and then we'll move into the kind of more systems-based discussion.
Absolutely. I haven't seen any initiatives. This, for me, would ring really well with the Web Radar project. And the only thing I can say is Measure are very quick to release updated terms for supporting COVID-19. And I think those terms are allowing us to capture some of the symptoms. So I'd be interested to see, how we can build what Measure have done into our systems, and perhaps that initiative can be extended to say, right, well, how many cases of COVID did we see versus, just the symptoms, and they weren't COVID-19.
Okay. Yeah, thanks very much indeed, James. So those observant amongst you will have noticed we've been joined by one more person on the video. So hi, Marie-Claire, you're currently muted, but I'll just get you to do a quick introduction in a sec. Mm-hmm. And perhaps I can see that Michelle Peralta is also on the line, but currently not either sharing video or audio. Oh, Michelle, can you join us?
Yes. Hi.
Okay, super. Thank you very much indeed. I know it's very early there in Chicago, so you're absolutely not going to insist on you sharing video at whatever 6:30 in the morning.
Thank you.
No, that's no problem at all. Perhaps though, if you perhaps Marie-Claire first, and then Michelle, you could just do a very quick introduction about your role and sort of area of focus that you're going to bring to this discussion today. Michelle, sure. Marie-Claire first.
Yep. Thanks, Mark. Hi, everybody. Pleased to be here today. My name is Marie-Claire Wilson. I'm a member of Mark's team, actually, in the UK, working on a range of projects, and some of them are focused on digital approaches to additional risk minimisation. So that's the input that I'll be hoping to give today when we turn to those kinds of discussions. So very much looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks. And Michelle, perhaps a quick word of introduction.
Yeah, hi. My name is Michelle Peralta. I'm the Senior Director of Business Strategy and Development at Feith Systems. I have over 20 years of experience in global pharmacovigilance and patient safety. My area of focus is in PV risk management, and I'm the in-house subject matter expert at Feith.
Thanks, Michelle. So essentially, the first question that we thought we would cover within this sort of second half of the discussion, where we really wanted to look a little bit more specifically perhaps at how the COVID-19 pandemic is actually impacting the development of digital approaches, the development of digital systems, or at least the kind of recognition of the potential value of other types of approaches beyond the standard adverse event single case handling systems that we've been talking about, and then the kind of typical remote working systems like email, Microsoft Teams, and obviously Zoom that we're all on today. But looking into other systems. So I know, Michelle, you've got a very specific experience within the Feith Orbit team in some areas of opportunity. So I guess, where do you see, the ability of kind of cloud-based systems to support, kind of these broader aspects of PV compliance, areas where PV compliance is very important, and that could perhaps, just add an additional set of tools for companies to support, this kind of distributed and remote working, and just generally but stronger opportunities to strengthen compliance.
Yes, thanks. I think these COVID times has really highlighted or magnified the inefficiencies that PV organizations are experiencing working under sort of a traditional approach to their PV operations. It tends to be passive, relying on largely manual systems and tools. And this can leave teams feeling extremely disjointed and fragmented, spending a lot of time piecing together important information from disparate systems, and ultimately this is costing PV organizations productivity time, and in the worst case, this lowers their ability to comply with their commitments. So now more than ever, PV can benefit greatly from adopting digital tools and holistic systems that can offer structure in both their systems and business processes, as well as automation to help meet their important safety commitments across the geographies, tools that can help foster global collaboration, and like I said, increase organizational productivity. So a system that's validated and that's compliant with the GVP processes, cloud-based system as well. One that has an established framework to help optimize and track your key PV activities. A system that's centralized to enable productivity so that your global teams can communicate in a central way and collaborate and work in a more efficient manner. And then one that employs automation to help enable your local and regional teams to deliver and implement their safety commitments in a more efficient manner, and to give your global teams as well some real-time visibility and traceability that they need to ensure and readily demonstrate oversight compliance to their global PV systems.
Okay, so essentially is about the way in which the current pandemic has just sort of highlighted the possibilities of these kind of more cloud-based collaborative tool sets, I guess, to sort of enable companies to move away from relying on email and exchanging Microsoft Excels and so forth in important areas of compliance, but move to stronger systems. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Thanks, Michelle. Anybody else on the team have experience of that kind of, in areas beyond the single case handling, the benefits of kind of getting the whole kind of PV organization globally into single kind of cloud-based systems for these sorts of other activities? Like, I think the ones Michelle mentioned were particularly around tracking of and management of commitments, but I suppose there are other areas as well, like PV agreement management. Adverse event reconciliation is always a great fun topic with so many partnership arrangements in place these days. So I don't know, Alexandr or James, have you had an experience of those things?
Yeah, so well, AZ have got a fair few automation tools around risk management commitments. For example, we've had that, and we've recently looked at a project led by Anthony Lees, in fact, on PVAs. Right. But I would say from a pharmacovigilance perspective, what COVID-19's brought together is the necessity to connect with other members of our team remotely. So rather than talk about a PV system, I think what we've identified is the need to, how do we use things like Microsoft Teams. How do we get 5 people into the room and come up with get to a conclusion? Whereas we used to actually sit in the room together and go through the data. Now we're having to do it remote. So I think tools that can better help us collaborate and replace that face-to-face time is something that probably is a bit more warranted than the need to replace an Excel sheet. We can all access that via the cloud. Having that conversation and getting consensus on a benefit risk profile, I think, is something that I would like to see worked on.
Right. Okay. So there's that kind of use of cross geography collaborative environment, and it's an interesting question actually, because certainly, I mean, my original background in pharma industry was within a local affiliate before moving into sort of a headquarters organisation, and one actually felt that oftentimes the folk within an affiliate organisation don't necessarily have as much opportunity to flexibly move between businesses as perhaps you do in a hub like in New Jersey or somewhere where there are so many different pharma companies that you can kind of build your career by moving around. And actually that kind of often leads to very high levels of expertise within affiliates, within the BV organisations that sit within the local markets. And actually, I think that's a very interesting question, the idea that you could sort of then start to actually tap into what, under normal circumstances, often is a rather neglected resource, where those often very highly skilled individuals might be expected to be doing, actually, frankly, the sort of routine operational tasks, where they're actually perfectly capable of making a very significant contribution more widely. So yeah, that's a really interesting perspective on this sudden move to greater collaboration. And Alexandr, did you have any thoughts about that in terms of the opportunities of other newer sophisticated IT systems to support these kind of PB activities?
I think we're still working with established ones, with old ones, but this situation may induce a development of new systems. I don't know yet what, how, but we all are looking for optimization, for simplification of all procedures. So I think IT companies are working on it, and we will get results soon.
Yes, okay, thank you. All right, let's move on a little bit. So the final question that we thought we would cover was one around actually, whether this the pandemic situation can actually drive an innovation, whether it can be, through requirement, drive organisations to look at new ways to do things that perhaps reflect not necessarily the difficulty or ease, or as we've been hearing, of working together within our own individual organisations, but actually some of the difficulties that this pandemic situation has thrown up in relation to the way we interact with our customers. So healthcare professionals, and in some cases also with patients. Marie-Claire has been very much focused on this from a specific perspective. So perhaps Marie-Claire, if you wanted just talk about the discussions we've been having around where you think there might be these opportunities to enhance in certain specialised areas of the PV spectrum of activity.
Sure, and I think it's probably a case of activities or projects that have been considered innovative and something new and something different are probably going to be seen as more commonplace and a core part of what PV professionals are doing. I mean, we've heard from our clients that they're very happy that they're involved in this digital risk minimization sphere, because they're having difficulties in getting their paper materials through to the HCPs and the patients, which is not surprising given the current environment. I mean, going to visit an HCP, sitting down with them, giving them the brochure, talking them through it and saying, this is what you give to your patients, this is for you, and this is what it all means. That's not going to happen now. And who knows when, if ever, that's going to become something that we can do regularly or not. So there is that element to it. And we also need to step back and think about the wider benefits of digital. So yes, now we can see how it might come into play and be useful during the pandemic and immediately afterwards. But there are many other benefits to digital. So if there's anybody on the line who's involved in RMPs and additional risk minimization work, and has gone through the pain of having to update materials, the paper materials, get them printed, get them sent out, the cost of that. I mean, I've been shocked to hear how much this sort of activity costs. With digital, in theory, you can just do that with a click. You can make sure that the most up-to-date versions of the materials are available to HCPs and patients at all times. They can access those materials whenever they want. We know how busy healthcare professionals are. We're not forcing them into accessing it in a particular way. We can give them a variety of opportunities to engage with that material. We can make it more interesting, and we can even collect data on how they're using it. So I know that we were thinking of maybe elaborating on this topic a little bit in a future session. So if anybody listening is interested in that topic, please do let the organisers know, and we can think about how we go into more depth, because in the time that we've got available, we can probably only scratch the surface. Anything to add, Mark, from that? Any thoughts from you?
If only I could unmute myself quickly enough. Yes, thank you, Mary Claire. I think that you know, obviously the topic we're covering here is this one about, you know, we've gone through this evolution in risk minimization over the course of the last few years, from certainly within EMA, from the original approach, which often led to quite a proliferation of risks being identified against which activities were committed, to a very strong narrowing of that focus, to the extent actually now that perhaps you know, the very narrow focus on the really key risks is you know, works well in a paper environment, and that's now the kind of regulatory structure that we're operating to. But I think GVP and its focus on just those absolutely key things doesn't really, we're kind of getting to the point where it doesn't really work when you start thinking about digital tools and the opportunities that they bring. Clearly, the management of effectiveness of a product and the management of risk of a product isn't only those few things that kind of burst up through above the line to be seen as absolutely key risks. You know, compliance and patient engagement and kind of ongoing education of the healthcare professionals are also really quite important. You know, the idea of, you know, you can't do routine, frequent behavioural nudges for patients to perhaps manage, you know, a pregnancy risk or something using a piece of paper. That simply doesn't work. So I think there's some very interesting opportunities in this space, but actually at the moment the regulations are written in such a way as to actually make the innovation quite difficult. So I think that this external threat that we're all facing, the pandemic, may actually lead, you know, through to a bit of a re-evaluation of some of that, and perhaps, you know, stronger, greater acceptability of some of these new and innovative approaches. That, you know, that's certainly something that we've been beginning to see. Michelle, did you have any further thoughts? We've got just a couple of minutes left, I think, for everybody, just to kind of wrap up on you know, areas of where they see opportunities to innovate, opportunities to ensure that, you know, compliance is maintained in this you know, new and rather challenging situation.
Yeah, I think that you know, trying to keep a handle of from a global perspective and from you know, from an MAH perspective can be really difficult, knowing that everybody has to communicate in a number of different systems, a number of different followed number of different processes and so forth. So trying to really rely on tools and systems that can help centralize that will reduce the redundancies that people are experiencing in trying to get that together. And I think having to work quickly and to understand in real time what's going on, transparency that a system can offer is really key at this point in time. You don't have to go around chasing people, asking how to rebuild, you know, or to retell the story of where things are and at any given point in time. It's all in you know, your system or your your tool that you're using. So it really goes a long way in the value that it brings to the organizations in this time. In these times is really, really important.
Thanks, Michelle, very much. James, any final wrapping up thoughts from yourself on this broad topic?
Yeah, sure. I think the emphasis of getting medicines to patients has been something that's really been reiterated quite often in AstraZeneca. You know, that's our first objective, and part of that's been enabling clinicians to have the information. So to build on what Mary Claire was saying is what you don't want to send a letter. For one, they don't want to get a letter, they want to touch a letter because of the pandemic. Now, getting them the latest information is important. So we're seeing a move towards digital health as quickly as possible. You know, is that an app? Perhaps. You know, how can we get lots of information? To build on one of the questions we had earlier about, you know, any initiatives for single case handling, perhaps flip that round to any initiatives that could support sharing information to a healthcare professional on one platform, rather than have every company have their own app. You know, maybe we need a pandemic app that where they can have access to this information. We can update them quicker.
Yeah, no, thanks, James. I think that's you know, that aspect of there are many areas where you can kind of see from a logical standpoint, you know, an academic standpoint, a value in collaboration. You know, any difficult to handle drug that's become generic, obvious opportunities to collaborate between the partners, but actually then establishing those collaborative networks and you know, getting useful output from them has been an enormously challenging thing in the old model. You know, and perhaps, you know, maybe hopefully the fact of these possibilities of pandemic, you know, this having become a reality now, may just change people's mindset a little bit, at least in order to perhaps make that a little bit more feasible and possible. Alexandr, can I ask you if you have any final wrapping up thoughts?
Yeah, I think now it's authorities' call, and to find out, to predict, to plan next steps coming with vaccines and safety of vaccines, because it would be the next step coming to us. So here, communication, new systems, new approaches, maybe probably would be or will be applied, and this is what we have to prepare for.
Yeah, thanks, Alexandr. That's a very good point. And clearly, vaccines have been a hot topic for some time, and you know, in this you know, current situation, we're going even higher up onto the radar than ever before. Let me just quickly. There was a question that's just come in, but let me just quickly ask Mary Claire if you've got any final thoughts as we kind of come towards the end of this, and I'll quickly address that question myself and see if anybody else has any other quick thoughts about it.
Well, nothing to add from me. I think it was great to have the different perspectives from James and Michelle and Alexandr. So great, thank you.
Okay, now the question that came in was around could we potentially suggest ways to ensure that you know, training for employees impacting on PV activities. You know, through this situation, and I guess, you know, the only thing I'd sort of throw into the ring in relation to that is, you know, we do have within our own organisation an interesting kind of contrast between some of the corporate training that we receive through formal, you know, kind of online systems which track participation and completion and so forth of those courses, and actually on the side, because you know, the PV part of our organisation is fairly small at the moment, you know, training on adverse event handling and requirements within our organisation is quite a specialist requirement and isn't actually part of the what we call our kind of online university. So we do have some interesting challenges in ensuring that we're properly compliant with our own requirements, and we've documented those thoroughly. And I guess my only personal comment on you know, mechanisms to ensure that there's training out there is that you as rapidly as possible get it into these kind of corporate online systems where there are opportunities to define it as part of a training curriculum for different roles within your organisation, and automate as much as possible that process, because when it becomes a manual process, it does add an awful lot to the workload. I don't know if anybody else on the line had any other thoughts or comments on that particular question.
I did actually. Just going back to the earlier points on collaboration, I think training, particularly in the context of this pandemic, is an area where pharmaceutical companies and academic institutions could get together and have one sort of portal with some key training elements that could be accessible globally or to whoever's interested, that would be tailored to the specific situation that we're in. I mean, I think that would be great.
Right, sort of real consistent fundamentals.
Yes.
Along the, we'd occasionally see, LinkedIn campaigns and so forth from people like Uppsala. Maybe organisations like that could kind of lead the way perhaps to collaborate. I certainly know that some of the kind of organisations like International Society of Pharmacovigilance, there's real focus on perhaps the non-traditional markets for pharmacovigilance and trying to lead those sorts of initiatives. But it's an interesting and really interesting point that perhaps in this era of virtual conferencing, we could take a look at. Well, look, we've got like less than a minute left to go, so can I just really thank everybody for your contribution, guys, around the virtual Zoom room. Really appreciated the panel discussion. It's been fun and interesting, and given the relatively short notice, actually really great contributions from everybody. So thank you so much for your time, and particularly Michelle, because I know it's ever so early over there. And thanks ever so much to everyone who's listening. I've got no idea how many contributors we've had, how many people that we've had on the other end of the line. But thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you found it interesting. And I'm sure you can find any of us that you want to follow up with any of these points on LinkedIn, where I'm quite sure we'd be happy to connect. So thanks very much, and thanks again to the organisers at Voice Summits. It's been a really enjoyable experience. So thanks all.
Thanks all. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks all. Bye bye.